Sunday, the 14th of April 1912, is a date which would go down in history. The greatest, largest, most luxurious, state-of-the-art, and safest vessel on the sea would graze an iceberg in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean and plunge to the depths just 2.5 hours later on the 15th of April at 2:20 a.m., taking with her over 1,500 lives. The incident gripped the world. The White Star Line's offices were swamped by relatives of the passengers, gripping to hope that their loved ones had survived and for news on what had happened. The news came when RMS Carpathia arrived at Pier 54, with survivors of the Titanic disaster aboard. The Carpathia arrived in New York on the evening of April 18, 1912. Its arrival was delayed due to bad weather at sea. The next day, a United States Senate inquiry into the sinking of the RMS Titanic started on the 19th of April 1912, the day Californian arrived unnoticed in Boston. Initially, the world was unaware of her and her part in the Titanic disaster. On the 22nd of April, the inquiry discovered that a ship near Titanic had failed to respond to the distress signals. The identity of the ship was unknown until the very next day. A small newspaper in New England, the Clinton Daily Item, printed a shocking story claiming that Californian had refused aid to Titanic. The source for the story was Californian's carpenter, James McGregor, who stated that he had been close enough to see Titanic's lights and distress rockets. On the same day, the Boston American printed a story sourced by Californian's assistant engineer, Ernest Gill, which essentially told the same story as the Daily Item. Captain Lord also spoke with several Boston area newspapers, but gave conflicting accounts. In a Boston Traveler article dated the 19th of April, Lord claimed that his ship was 30 miles from Titanic, but in a Boston Post article dated the 24th of April, he claimed 20 miles. Lord told the Boston Globe that his ship had spent 3 hours steaming around the wreck site trying to render assistance, but Third Officer Grove later stated that the search ended after 2 hours, at 10:40. When reporters asked Lord about his exact position the night of the disaster, he refused to respond, calling such information state secrets. After the newspaper revelations on the 23rd of April, the U.S. Senate inquiry issued subpoenas for multiple members of the crew, including Gill and Lord. During his testimony, Gill repeated his claims. Lord's testimony was conflicting and changing. For example, he detailed 3 totally different ice conditions. He admitted knowing about the rockets, after telling Boston newspapers that his ship had not seen any rockets, but insisted that they were not distress rockets, and they were not fired from Titanic, but a small steamship, the so-called third ship of the night. Yet the testimony of Captain J. Knapp, U.S. Navy, and a part of the Navy Hydrographer's Office, made clear that Titanic and Californian were in sight of each other, and no third vessel had been in the area. The so-called scrap log of Californian also came under question. This is a log wherein all daily pertinent information is entered before being approved by the captain, and entered into the official log. Company policy of International Mercantile Marine Company, the parent of both Leyland Line and the White Star Line, required scrap logs to be destroyed daily. The official log mentioned neither a nearby ship nor rockets. At the British inquiry, Stone was not asked to recall the notations he had actually written in the scrap log during his bridge watch between midnight and 4 a.m. on the 15th of April. Some of Titanic's rescued passengers and crew returned to Britain aboard RMS Adriatic after giving testimony at the United States inquiry, departing from New York on the 2nd of May, 1912 to arrive in Southampton 7 days later. Meanwhile, across the sea in Britain, the inquiry into the disaster had already started. The inquiry began on the 2nd of May to 3rd of July, when testimony would be taken by J. Bruce Ismay, the surviving crew of Titanic, many of the passengers, the crew of RMS Carpathia, crew of SS Californian, the crew of RMS Olympic, and Alexander Carlisle, whom was the original architect of the Olympic class, before leaving Harland and Wolff during the construction of the ship over a dispute with lifeboat capacity. As the inquiry went on, the world held its breath, waiting to hear what had happened. The inquiry was chaired Lord John Bigham, 1st Viscount of Mersey. One of the major questions that had come about was the whereabouts of a certain vessel. A vessel which was thought to be close to Titanic, closer than that of RMS Carpathia, and could seen by some witnesses on the horizon of the starboard bow of Titanic. This vessel was believed to be that of SS Californian, a ship operated by the Leyland Line, and part of International Mercantile Marine Company, the very company whom also owned a large stock of White Star Line. The inquiry dove into every aspect of the ship, the crew and her route, leaving no stone unturned, including testimony from lead stocker Frederick Barrett, whom gave testimony of the fire on board Titanic and the damage that may have come from it. Along with what happened in the boiler room on the night of the incident, Frederick Fleet, the lookout whom initially spotted the iceberg, was also called to testify. One key question, however: what of the allegations? What of the SS Californian? A documentary drama, which I would recommend to watch, is Save Our Souls, the Titanic Inquiry, starring Paul McGann as Sir Rufus Daniel Isaacs, 1st Marquess of Reading, whom represented the Board of Trade at the inquiry of the disaster. At the British inquiry, Lord again gave conflicting, changing, and evasive testimony. By contrast, Captain Arthur Rostron of Carpathia, at each inquiry, gave consistent and forthright testimony. During the British inquiry, Rostron was asked to confirm an affidavit he had made to the United States inquiry. Among the other things in his affidavit, he confirmed that it was daylight at about 4:20 a.m. At 5 o'clock it was light enough to see all around the horizon. We then saw 2 steamships to the northwards, perhaps 7 or 8 miles distant. Neither of them was Californian. During the inquiry, the crew of Californian, like Captain Lord, gave conflicting testimonies. Most notably, Lord said he was not told that the nearby ship had disappeared, contradicting testimony from James Gibson, who said he reported it, and Lord had acknowledged him. Also during the inquiries, Titanic survivors recalled seeing the lights of another ship after Titanic had hit the iceberg. To Titanic's 4th Officer Boxhall, the other ship appeared to be off Titanic's bow, 5 miles, 8 kilometers, away and heading in her direction. Just like Californian's officers, Boxhall attempted signaling the ship with a Morse lamp, but received no response. However, Titanic lookout Frederick Fleet, who was in the crow's nest when the iceberg was sighted and remained there for another 40 minutes, testified at the U.S. inquiry that he did not see the lights of another ship while in the crow's nest. He only saw a light later, after leaving the ship on a lifeboat. Titanic's captain Edward Smith had felt the ship was close enough that he ordered the first lifeboats launched on the port side to row over to the ship, drop off the passengers, and come back to Titanic for more. Moreover, lifeboat occupants reported the other ship's lights were seen from the lifeboats throughout the night. One lifeboat rowed towards them, but never seemed to get any closer. 3rd Officer Charles Groves of the Californian testified to the British inquiry that at 23:10 ship's time, he had seen the lights of another ship come into view 10 or 12 miles away, 3.5 points above Californian's starboard beam. At about 23:30, Groves went below to inform Lord. The latter suggested that the ship be contacted by Morse lamp, which was tried, but no reply was seen. To Groves, she was clearly a large liner, as she had multiple decks brightly lit. The ship finally seemed to stop and extinguish her deck lights at 23:40, the same time Titanic stopped her engines. At the British inquiry, Groves agreed that if the ship he saw had turned 2 points to port, it would have concealed her deck lights. Slightly after midnight, 2nd Officer Herbert Stone took watch from Groves. He testified that he, too, observed the ship, judging it to be about 5 miles away. He tried signaling her with the Morse lamp, also without success. Apprentice Officer James Gibson, who had been doing the Morse signaling, testified that at 0:55, Stone told him he had observed 5 rockets in the sky above the nearby ship. Stone testified that he had informed Captain Lord, although the British Enquiry did not ask whether or not he communicated the number. Lord asked if the rockets had been a company signal, but Stone did not know. Lord and Stone both testified that Stone reported they were not distress signals. Lord ordered Stone to tell him if anything about the ship changed, to keep signaling it with the Morse lamp, but did not order that it be contacted by wireless. Gibson testified that Stone had expressed unease to him about the situation. "A ship is not going to fire rockets at sea for nothing," Stone said. "She looks very queer out of the water, her lights look queer." Gibson observed, "She looks rather to have a big side out of the water," and he agreed that everything was not all right with her, that it was a case of some kind of distress. Stone, however, under questioning by the British Enquiry, which became more and more incredulous, testified repeatedly that he did not think at the time that the rockets could have been distress signals, and that the possibility did not occur to him until he learned the Titanic had sunk. By 2 a.m., the ship appeared to be leaving the area. A few minutes later, Gibson informed Captain Lord as such and that 8 white rockets had been seen. Lord asked whether he was sure of the color. Gibson said yes and left. At the inquiry, Groves admitted that he believed the ship firing rockets was that of the Titanic. The final report of the British Enquiry was published on the 30th of July, 1912. The lines of questioning at the inquiry had resulted in a detailed description of the ship, an account of the ship's journey, a description of the damage caused by the iceberg, an account of the evacuation and rescue. There was also a special section devoted to the circumstances of Californian. The report found that Titanic's sinking was solely the result of colliding with the iceberg, not due to any inherent flaws with the ship, and that the collision had been brought about by a dangerously fast speed in icy waters. The court, having carefully inquired into the circumstances of the above-mentioned shipping casualty, finds, for the reasons appearing in the annex hereto, that the loss of the said ship was due to collision with an iceberg, brought about by the excessive speed at which the ship was being navigated. It also found that the lookout being kept was inadequate given the navigational hazards Titanic faced, and that the ship's officers had been complacent. There were too few lifeboats available, and they had not been properly filled or manned with trained seamen, though they had been lowered correctly. The inquiry concluded that Californian could have pushed through the ice to the open water without any serious risk, and so have come to the assistance of the Titanic. Had she done so, she might have saved many, if not all, of the lives that were lost. The Board of Trade's representative suggested to Lord Mersey that a formal inquiry should be held into Captain Lord's competency to continue as master of a British ship, but no action was taken against him due to legal technicalities. The Board of Trade was criticized for its inadequate regulations, notably the failure to ensure that enough lifeboats were provided and that crews were given proper training in their use. The Duff Gordons were cleared of wrongdoing, but it was made clear that they should have acted more tactfully. In contrast to the American inquiry, the Mersey report did not condemn the failures of the Board of Trade, the White Star Line, or Titanic's captain, Edward Smith. The report found that although Smith was at fault for not changing course or slowing down, he had not been negligent, because he had followed long-standing practice, which had not previously been shown to be unsafe. The inquiry noted that British ships alone had carried 3.5 million passengers over the previous decade with the loss of just 10 lives. It concluded that Smith had merely done only that which other skilled men would have done in the same position. However, the practice itself was faulty, and it is to be hoped that the last has been heard of this practice. What was a mistake in the case of the Titanic would without doubt be negligence in any similar case in the future. The report's recommendations, along with those of the earlier United States Senate inquiry that had taken place in the month after the sinking, led to changes in safety practices. As for Captain Stanley Lord of SS Californian, while Lord was never tried or convicted of any offense, he was still viewed publicly as a pariah after the Titanic disaster. His attempts to fight for his exoneration gained him nothing, and the events of the night of 15th April 1912 would haunt him for the rest of his life. Lord was dismissed by the Leyland Line in August 1912. So far as any negligence of the SS Californian's officers and crew was concerned, the conclusions of both the American and British inquiries seemed to disapprove of Lord's actions, but stopped short of recommending charges. In 1985, Titanic shocked the world again. During a search of the area, Robert Ballard stumbled across the boiler of Titanic and later the bow of Titanic, bringing about more questions than answers, as it had then been confirmed that Titanic had split in two, contrast to what some, including Charles Lightoller, had stated that she went down whole. However, numerous witnesses testified that she split on the surface. The boilers were found first, figuring that they would have gone straight down due to a lack of aerodynamics, and their weight as opposed to the bow being streamlined. The coordinates of the boiler was recorded and analyzed. A later hearing was conducted in 1992 regarding the involvement of Californian. It was concluded that Californian, from her stated location, was merely 18 miles away, meaning that she could have headed to Titanic that night. However, it concluded that had she have fired her engines and headed to Titanic, she would likely have completed the job which Carpathia had done in picking up survivors, and likely the outcome of deaths may not have been much different. The report in the reappraisal can be found online. It neither exonerates SS Californian nor does it prove their innocence.